All right, everyone, get ready. We're diving deep today, and this time it's into AI alignment. Specifically, a paper called Beyond Preferences in AI Alignment that's really got people talking. And, our listeners are right there with you, deep in the AI world, so we're not shying away from the complexities here. This isn't just about making AI do what we want. This is about figuring out what the goals of AI should even be on a fundamental level.
That's what's so thought-provoking about this paper. It's challenging the very foundation of how we think about AI alignment right now. The heavy focus on aligning AI with human preferences. Well, this paper throws a bit of a wrench in that.
It really does. There's this assumption that if we can just get AI to understand our desires, we'll end up with systems that act in our best interest. But our
Yeah.
preference is really enough, especially as AI gets more powerful. That's what these authors are questioning.
Right, right. They call this dominant approach the preferentist paradigm. To really get into their critique, we should probably lay out the four main theses they present. It'll help make sense of where they're coming from.
Okay, so thesis number one, and I'm quoting directly here, human behavior can be modeled as preference-based utility maximization. Essentially, trying to understand our actions as us trying to get the most of what we want, maximizing our utility.
Yep. Then there's thesis two. Rational agents should maximize expected utility, meaning a rational agent, whether it's a person or AI, should always be picking the action most likely to lead to the best outcome based on what it knows about the world and the consequences.
Got it. Thesis 3 gets into how this applies to AI. Single principle alignment means matching the AI's actions to an individual's preferences. So, like your personal AI assistant, the goal is to design it to learn your specific preferences and act accordingly.
And to wrap it up, thesis four broadens the scope. Multi-principle alignment means maximizing the satisfaction of aggregate human preferences. Basically, AI that interacts with lots of people, now the challenge is aligning its actions with this whole collection of preferences, not just one person's.
Now, just on the surface, these theses seem pretty reasonable, maybe even obvious. In fact, a lot of AI alignment techniques are based on these ideas. Inverse reinforcement learning, RLHF, direct preference optimization, the list goes on.
Oh, absolutely. But, and this is the kicker, the paper argues that these seemingly sound principles, they're actually built on some pretty shaky ground.
Okay, so let's dig into that critique. They start by going after rational choice theory. The big idea from economics and decision-making that underlies a lot of this preferentist paradigm. They argue that as a way to describe how humans actually behave, it just doesn't hold up. We aren't perfectly rational even if you add in some noise or uncertainty.
Right, right. And they don't just point out the flaws, they offer an alternative, the resource rationality model. The idea being that we have limited cognitive resources, so we rely on heuristics and biases, these shortcuts, instead of always doing the perfectly rational calculation. It's more nuanced.
So instead of assuming we're always making these perfectly calculated decisions with complete information, it's more like we're working with what we've got, cognitively speaking.
Exactly. And this has big implications for how we design AI. The paper points out that these traditional reward or utility functions, the core of so many AI alignment techniques, they struggle to capture the complexity of human values. There's a quote here: "Reward or utility functions cannot represent all human preferences." They go on, "Preferences do not capture the semantics of human values and reasons or value commensuration."
So we can't just boil down all of our values and motivations to a single number, or even a complex function, because there's something more there. It's not just about the preferences themselves, but the deeper values and reasons behind them.
Exactly, and that's where the critique starts to hit home. If we're just training AI on preferences as they are, we might be missing the bigger picture of what actually matters to us.
That makes a lot of sense. If we as humans aren't perfectly rational, and our preferences don't always reflect our true values, then how can we expect AI that learns from that data to act in our best interests, especially as it becomes more powerful and independent?
That is the million-dollar question, right? And it's something we really need to grapple with if we want a future where AI is truly aligned with what we value. And it's not even just about, working within our limitations. They take it a step further, suggesting that a resource-rational AI, it would consider how we as humans would act if we had unlimited cognitive power. Like, imagine AI that doesn't just learn from our messy real-world decisions, but tries to figure out what we'd choose if we were always thoughtful and informed.
That is fascinating. Instead of mimicking our flawed choices, it's more like AI striving for some ideal version of ourselves, always making the right call. But how do you even translate that into design? We can't just give AI unlimited brain power any more than we can ourselves.
Right. It's not about magic, haha, but it is about rethinking how we represent those human values within the AI system itself. And that leads into their critique of another core idea: the reliance on those reward and utility functions as stand-ins for what humans want.
We touched on that earlier, but I'm really interested to dig deeper here. They argue that these functions, while useful in some ways, they just can't fully grasp how complex our values really are. Specifically, they mention limitations with both Markovian reward functions, which are common in reinforcement learning, and even the more flexible but potentially unbounded utility functions.
Exactly. So, starting with those Markovian ones, the paper points out that they struggle with what's called time-extended preferences, which are crucial for how we make decisions involving long-term goals. They're stuck on immediate rewards, which can lead to short-sighted behavior. Think of it like a chess game. A simple reward function might be all about taking a piece on your next move, even if it means you'll lose later. But humans, we can grasp those future consequences, right? Sacrificing something now for a better outcome down the line.
So that kind of reward might work for narrow AI tasks, where you don't need that big picture planning. But when we're talking about AI that has to operate in our complex world, it falls short.
Exactly. And while those utility functions, in theory, they can represent those time-extended preferences, the paper argues they're often too unconstrained. Without some structure, they become this huge mess, incredibly hard to learn from data.
Right? Like trying to hit a moving target, constantly shifting. How can we expect AI to learn a reliable utility function if our own preferences are fluid, context-dependent, even contradictory at times? They use a simple example in the paper to illustrate this, something about buying apples and oranges.
Yes. It shows how hard it is to separate simple preferences from those deeper motivations just by observing. Like, if someone buys 10 apples and 2 oranges, do they actually like apples more? Or are they baking a pie and the oranges were an afterthought? Simple scenario, but it highlights the problem of inferring too much from limited data.
It shows how easily our assumptions about preference can be flipped when you look closer. And this brings up an even bigger question the paper raises. Even if we could perfectly represent preferences, are they really what we value most?
It's like we were saying before, preferences, they're often constructed, not inherent. Our experiences, our beliefs, the social context, even just our mood that day, it all shapes them. There's a line in the paper: preferences are generated from values and beliefs. They adapt to the environment and are sensitive to framing effects, which suggests that elicited preferences will be highly contingent on the elicitation procedure.
So they're not always a reliable guide to what would actually be best for us long term.
We can't treat them like these static, objective truths to extract and optimize. They're dynamic, subjective, influenced by all these factors. It's almost like they're saying, instead of AI chasing after whatever we think we want in the moment, we need it aligned with our deeper values, those principles of a good life. You got it. And to do that well, they argue we need to go beyond just treating values as inputs to some decision-making machine. We need AI that can grasp the meaning of ethical concepts. Imagine AI that doesn't just know fairness is good, but understands what fairness means in different situations, can reason about the trade-offs with other values like efficiency.
That is ambitious. How do you even begin to teach AI about something as nuanced as fairness or justice, well-being?
Million-dollar question, and the paper acknowledges it's a huge challenge. But they point to areas like natural language processing, concept learning as potential ways forward. It's about teaching AI not just the dictionary definition, but how these concepts are used, debated, how they play out in the real world.
It's like we're trying to get AI to think like ethicists, weighing different values, understanding moral dilemmas. That's a tall order.
It is, definitely. But if we want AI aligned with human values in a truly beneficial way, those are the kinds of questions we got to be asking.
And it circles back to their main point, right? We need to move beyond preferences as the target for alignment, especially as we head towards more general-purpose AI.
Precisely. They argued that while aligning with preferences might be okay for those narrow AI tasks where everything's well-defined, it's a recipe for trouble with systems that are meant to be more autonomous, more integrated into our lives. To quote them directly again, insofar as human preferences are seen to be constructed from or reflective of underlying values, this raises the question, why not align AI systems with these underlying values directly, rather than with their often flawed and potentially manipulative products?
So, if not preferences as our guiding light, what do they propose as the alternative?
This is where it gets even more interesting. They suggest shifting focus from aligning with individual preferences to aligning with role-specific normative criteria. Basically, instead of AI catering to every whim of every user, we focus on what good behavior looks like for that specific role the AI is fulfilling.
Okay, that sounds more practical, maybe even more robust. Got any examples of what that would look like in action?
Absolutely. Let's say we have a narrow AI, like a medical diagnosis assistant. Instead of trying to learn every doctor's individual preferences, which could be all over the place, we align it with the norms of the medical field itself.
So things like prioritizing patient safety, following evidence-based practice, confidentiality, acting with integrity. It's aligning with the core values of the profession, not just individual quirks.
Exactly. And you can extend this to those more general purpose assistants too. They talk about aligning with the normative ideal of an assistant. Instead of trying to predict and fulfill every single desire a user has, these AIs would be guided by what it means to be helpful, respectful, trustworthy, but not overbearing or manipulative.
I like this normative ideal concept. It's moving beyond that genie in a bottle view of AI towards something that collaborates with us ethically. But how do you even define that ideal, especially when you're talking about AI used by so many different people with different values, different expectations? Is one thing for a specific field like medicine, but how does that scale up?
You've hit on a core challenge, and the paper doesn't shy away from that. This is where the conversation about AI alignment goes beyond just technical solutions into the realm of social and political questions, which gets much more complex.
It's like we're moving from here's the code for the perfect assistant to what does this good even mean in this context? That's a huge philosophical leap, never mind the technical side.
Exactly. And that's where this paper really pushes us beyond that individual user. They talk about moving towards aligning AI with, and this is a mouthful, politically negotiated normative standards.
Okay, I'll be honest, that sounds a little intimidating.
Yeah.
Paint me a picture here. What does that even look like in a world where we're relying on AI more and more?
Well, it means we stop trying to please every single preference, which we've already established is a recipe for a disaster, right? And instead, we focus on setting norms for AI behavior that we agree on as a society. It's like instead of AI trying to be everything to everyone, which is impossible, it operates within boundaries that reflect our shared values and protect us all.
So finding those areas of agreement, the common ground where all those different values can at least coexist, that sounds incredibly difficult to pull off.
It is a huge challenge, no doubt. But the paper highlights some promising work being done with, for example, constitutional AI.
Constitutional AI.
Yeah. Researchers are developing ways to train AI systems to follow a set of principles that embody human values. Those principles, they could come from things we already have, like legal documents or ethical codes.
So it's kind of like giving AI a moral compass, but instead of a single company or a group of engineers deciding what that compass points to, it comes from a much broader conversation about what's right and wrong.
Exactly. And they make the point that this isn't a one-time thing either.
Yeah.
As our values as a society change, the norms that govern AI, they need to change too. We have to keep the conversation going, keep refining things.
That really highlights something important, I think. AI development, it's not just this technical thing happening in the vacuum. It's intertwined with these big questions about how we want to live, how we govern ourselves, especially as AI gets more powerful.
100%. And that's what makes this paper so important. It pushes us beyond those comfortable technical solutions, makes us confront the bigger picture, the social and ethical consequences of what we're building. It's a call to action, not just for the AI folks, but for policymakers, ethicists, everyone, really.
It's not just code, it's shaping the future. This paper is a good reminder that AI development, it's a human endeavor with a huge responsibility attached to it. We need to make sure these technologies are used for good. This deep dive has given us all a lot to think about. We always encourage our listeners to check out the source material themselves, keep these conversations going. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep asking those tough questions.